All right. Hello, this is Ellie Krug. I'm the Executive Director of Call for Justice, and welcome to another session of our training of United Way, Greater Twin Cities United Way 211 here in the Twin Cities. And today we have a wonderful program on understanding what crime victims' rights are and what services exist for crime victims in Minnesota. We have two phenomenal speakers, and I'll introduce both of those right now. Our first speaker is Sharon Haas, who joined the staff of the Council on Crime and Justice in January 2015 and serves as the Crime Victim Advocacy Services Manager. Before that, she worked as the collaboration specialist with the Sexual Violence Justice Institute at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, where she provided support and training to sexual assault response teams. She also has worked as a legal advocate for survivors of intimate partner violence with the Minneapolis Intervention Project. She holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Minnesota and a BA in urban community policy from James Madison College at Michigan State University. Our second speaker is Lolita Ulloa, who is originally from Ecuador and grew up in Massachusetts. She attended Suffolk University Law School. She worked at Legal Aid in Boston as a public service attorney and has lived in Minnesota since 1992. She began working in Minnesota with Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services in St. Paul, and then went on to Centro Legal, heading their domestic violence unit. She came to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office in 1994 as their first director of the Domestic Abuse Service Center. Since January of 2001, she's been the managing attorney for the Victim Services Division, which incorporates victim, witness, and domestic abuse service center services for the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. Please help me welcome both of our speakers. And we'll begin with Sharon, and take her away, Sharon.
All right. As Ellie mentioned, I'm with the Council on Crime and Justice, and I'm going to be talking about our crime victim advocacy services. What I'd like to do is just give you some brief introduction to the Council on Crime and Justice and a bit of background about our crime victim advocacy services specifically, who we serve, and types of supports we provide. And I'll give some examples of types of calls that we get to the crime victim hotline, and I'm sure in between we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions and have some conversation.
And yesterday, actually, that worked the best.
Yeah.
If you interrupt us and ask questions, it was perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the Council on Crime and Justice has been around since 1957. And our mission is that we're seeking a criminal justice system that's equitable and just, that treats people with compassion and dignity, allows for second chances, ultimately working to create a safe and a thriving community. And we do this by working with both ex-offenders of crime and also providing supports to crime victims. And so the three areas in which we work, and again, this is with both populations, ex-offenders of crime and crime victims. We provide individual advocacy, so advocacy directly to folks who contact us, and also system advocacy related to ex-offenders and to crime victims. And then we have a research and evaluation component to our work, research projects related to crime trends, ways to address crime, things that are happening with ex-offenders. And you can find some of our research on the crime victim or on the Council on Crime and Justice website. We also have legislative initiatives, and the primary one that we've been involved with this last year is around voting rights for ex-offenders. And so the focus for what I'll be sharing today is really around our crime victim advocacy work. which began back in 1977. For the first couple of decades of the Council on Crime and Justice, the work was principally with ex-offenders of crime. And it was not only in Minnesota, but nationally, that there was a growing awareness around how crime victims' needs were not necessarily being addressed, and that there weren't services necessarily to address them. And so there were a number of efforts that began during that time. In 1974, the first Minnesota Crime Victim Reparations Board, 76, the first Victim Assistance Program, and again, we began as a crime victim advocacy program in 1977. And there has been continuing crime victim rights established in Minnesota and nationally since that time. And I understand my colleague is going to be talking more about the crime victim rights specifically, and there's also some information in the document that was prepared for this presentation. But generally, just so you know, that these are the categories in which crime victim rights have been established in Minnesota. There are rights around being able to be informed, provisions for safety for crime victims in the criminal justice process and in other contexts, right to participate in prosecution, and to seek emergency assistance and compensation, and there will be more discussion about financial assistance that's available. And just to provide some context, each of us work directly with crime victims and provide supports to crime victims, but there are some distinctions in terms of the ways in which we do that. And for the Council on Crime and Justice, our crime victim advocacy services are community-based, and so some of the distinctions around that are that we are in contact with crime victims during a range of a process of a crime, so it's not necessarily directly related to a criminal justice case. And another distinction is that we can be working with a crime victim whether there are charges or there are not charges that the crime victim is facing. It could be something that happened some years in the past. And another distinction is that any information that is provided to us by a crime victim is confidential information. Oftentimes it's anonymous, and we don't necessarily learn who the crime victim is. It very much depends. And then too, the contact with our services is initiated by a crime victim, and that can be the case as well with system-based services. The primary way that crime victims connect with us is through a 24-hour hotline. And that hotline is, we recruit and prepare, right now it's a team of about 30 volunteers that staffs the crime victim hotline, primarily in after hours. Sometimes there will be volunteers or interns that staff the hotline during office hours as well. And we have a team of backup staff that are prepared to help crime victim advocates to address more complex situations or to respond to questions. And then we have two crime victim advocate and myself on staff at the Council on Crime and Justice. And the pool of volunteers and staff, many of them come from related fields in which they're working during the day. There are folks with the crime prevention specialists from law enforcement, folks who work with reparations or in criminal justice field or in social services field. So it's a range of experience and expertise that crime victim advocates have. And who we serve, as you have heard, certainly the common denominator is that folks are contacting us in some way related to a crime. And sometimes there's a hotline that's focused more on a population or on a particular type of crime. The type of crime we're most often contacted about is something we refer to in the field as general crime. That doesn't necessarily mean something to crime victims themselves, but I'll give some examples of what those crimes are. Again, it's regardless of their participation in the criminal justice system. We'll be fielding calls from folks, whether that's the case or not. And we work to address immediate needs that are related to a crime. So people may contact us about a range of issues, but it's really related to a specific situation that we're working to try to address what the needs they've identified.
Can you give us an example, Sharon?
And examples of general crime that we are most often contacted about, generally it's any crimes that are outside of the category of intimate partner violence or sexual violence. We most often refer folks directly to those specialized services related to those types of crimes, but it tends to be, and that's not exclusively the case. There are some situations we work to address where it's a sexual assault or a domestic violence victim. But generally this is a case, and so we address assaults, someone who was held up or assaulted or threatened, vandalism and arson, property damage is something that we receive many calls about. Sometimes we provide assistance to family members of homicide victims. Will be contacted about particular supports that they need, but that's something where there's probably a fair amount of crossover between the services that my colleague provides and the Council on Crime and Justice. Theft, robbery, burglary, certainly stolen identity theft, fraud is something that we're contacted about. Harassment and stalking, and then you see some of the other types of crime there.
Sure. So you mentioned you'll help out at like any stage of like a crime victim, whether it's a recent crime or years in the past. Is it often hard, like establishing what a victim needs at that point, or is it a fairly straightforward thing to find out?
The answer is both. Okay. Sometimes someone will contact us and they provide a lot of information about a number of different things, and so we will certainly will listen to what it is they're wanting to share, and it could be a number of different things that they've identified, and then once they've had the opportunity to really share the information that they're trying to convey, we will ask questions and talk with them and see if there's an immediate need that they're most wanting to address. Other times someone will call us and they'll say, my car was stolen and I need to retrieve it from the impound lot, and it's very straightforward. So it's the whole range. Okay. The whole range.
Could you just give examples of the specific type of assistance that you could provide? Because that's not what I'm really clear on.
Absolutely, I'm getting to that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just think it was similar to your question, but for example, a couple years ago, my car was broken into and my purse was stolen. And the little cards you get from the police say that there's really not much you can do for property loss. So I didn't bother calling anyone because I was like, well, there's nothing you can do. I mean, for example, would you have been able to help me get anything done out of that other than filing a police report, or just as an example?
So in a situation like that, we're not able to provide what funds were stolen. If you had cash stolen from your wallet, that's not something that we can respond to directly. Some of the things that we might do if you haven't made a police report would be to tell you about the importance of doing that if you had a number of identity things that identified you in your wallet. We would talk with you about places of contact, about just to go down a checklist in terms of the contacting your bank and your credit cards if there are safety issues involved, where it's something that your address is identified, and talk with you about whether or not you've gotten your locks changed or you want to change your locks and the process for doing that. So it just depends on what was in your wallet, what you're most concerned about, but we would talk through those. Just basically the follow-up steps after something like that. Yes, and just kind of check with you about things that might have occurred to you and things that might not have occurred to you about steps you might take. Absolutely.
What about any financial out-of-pocket that, in this case, Teresa might have had to do to get a new window? New window in her car, yeah. If yes. Insurance didn't have it or something. Yes,
we would. That's another thing that we would talk through with you. Where if it's a window that was broken in your car, that is something that we can provide assistance with. It might be something that your insurance covers, and we would check with you about that. We would work with anyone who calls about immediate safety issues, and in the case of a car, you would need to replace a broken window. We wouldn't be able to address other types of damage if your car's functioning, but yes, we would be able to. We potentially could certainly cover assistance with that.
And then, Sharon, can you relate about your eligibility requirements? You know, where on FPG, where in the state?
In terms of anyone in the state of Minnesota can contact us. Most often, we're going to refer someone who is in another part of the state to someone more, closer to where they are. And it might be that they're already in contact with someone who's closer to where they are if they've reported the crime. And there are services. If they're not in touch with those services, we would certainly put them in touch with those services. And in the case of emergency assistance support, it needs to be related to the immediate crime. And it needs to be something that is not covered by another source. And so those are the kinds of things that we would work with crime victims to try to support and provide assistance for.
And is there an income guideline for, like, say, I had to pay $300 to get my window replaced? I mean, is there an income guideline if a caller calls in, my car was broken into, I don't know what to do, I can't afford to get my window replaced, my insurance won't do it?
You know, it's more that we would inquire with them about other options that they might not have tried, and if they've applied for assistance, or if it's something where it's your car insurance and it's a $500 deductible, then we don't have a specific guideline in terms of who would be eligible economically. It's more related to the crime, but it's more addressing whether or not there are other sources that you would have available first before covering that. And that there would not be other sources, and for some instances you would need to say, well, you would need to indicate that you're not able to cover it. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Leo?
You said assistance with immediate needs. What about any long-term needs? Somebody broke into somebody's house and it was very traumatic, and they kind of need some long-term counseling. You know, they might not have needed it immediately, but a couple months later, they're finding that they're still a little paranoid and they don't have any money to pay for counseling.
And that is a situation that might more fall into a reparations category, where long-term counseling or medical assistance might more likely be covered by reparations, but that would require that there was a criminal justice charge and conviction. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yep, there's two comments. One to yours, getting your purse stolen. Most of the contents of whatever's in your car is covered by your insurance. The insurance doesn't like to pay it, but if you called one of the advocates, we would say, okay, your insurance probably has a little thing that says, and so, you know, we would maybe make the phone call with you to the insurance company. But you're making a police report is the important part, because if they catch the person, then it gets into the system, and there's all sorts of things you can ask for as a crime victim, and one of them is restitution. And restitution just means just making you whole. So you would list all of the things that were in your purse or in your car that were taken, and then that would be part of the court case during the criminal process, and then you could get the restitution back. And there's a whole procedure for getting restitution back for crime victims, which actually is handled by my office for Hennepin County. So that's one thing on that. And then the long term and the short term, I think it depends. If it's a case that's come in and has been charged, that is all incorporated and considered as part of reparations and restitution. So we have a lot of crime victims that will need counseling, and their family will need counseling. All of that will be incorporated. So the restitution kind of is still alive during the course of the counseling. Sometimes you can say, I went to the doctor and my arm was broken and now it's fixed. That's sort of a some certain. But the counseling and mental health support's way different. So what we do is we put, we sort of protect the restitution amount to include any counseling that's associated with the crime. But if you don't report it, it doesn't get reviewed and it doesn't get charged. There are also other resources out there for long-term counseling depending on what that counseling is. For instance, for DV and sexual assault, lots of agencies have ongoing counseling. You would not have to pay for that. For children who have been victimized, a little bit different, especially if they're not English speaking. And those are the kind of things that we would help, advocates would help with resources to try to find out what is out there in the community and they're really well tapped into if you had, say, a Russian victim that was calling you about some long-term counseling.
What about just a variation on Lael's question, whereas the house has been broken into, the homeowner made a police report, but they haven't caught the perpetrator. And so in that instance, I'm going to take it that reparations wouldn't be available because you don't have a case that's charged, which means a case filed. Mm-hmm. So, and so in that instance,
insurance, your homeowner's insurance would cover some of the costs.
If I was a renter and didn't have renter's insurance, then you're kind of out, right?
Yep.
Right, and I suppose that the homeowner's health insurance could pay for the counseling.
But if, for instance, you were you kind of knew who your perpetrator was and was just not caught. Most DV people know that. They know who their perp is. So that would be slightly different, because then that might be something where emergency assistance, and we can talk about that a little later, which is a grant program that's funded through the state and is given to all pretty much nonprofit agencies, including prosecutors' offices. There doesn't have to be a charged case. They have to be a victim of a crime, and the assessment of what that person gets, for instance, my office is me, and we could assess what it is that's being, but what I wouldn't reimburse you for is a TV.
Right.
I would reimburse, or I would consider it, if the three coats for the winter for the kids were stolen, and they don't have money to have coats for the winter, and we're in winter. I mean, that would be a very different, what can you live with, what can't you live with kind of thing.
And for our folks viewing at home, DV is short for domestic violence. All right, Sharon, you want to...
Thank you, Allie. Just to ask a question before we move on. So you explained restitution as making you whole, and so what's the definition of reparations? Because I thought that would...
reparations is reparations is a state program that will cover things very specific to the crime. For instance, funeral expenses.
Okay.
Maybe travel for the family. Any health costs that aren't covered by the insurance. Some counseling can be probably included in that. They're much more tangible, defined, and it's not part of the prosecutor's office. Restitution is part of the prosecution of a case. Reparations sits alone and has a whole different process, a whole different board. They make determinations based on a panel.
Okay.
Restitution for us is part of what we incorporate as part of the relief at sentencing once somebody has been convicted of a crime. They need to make that person whole.
Okay.
And for purposes of our referrals, you know, our key is portals. And so the portal for somebody who's calling restitution or reparations, and more likely they'll be saying restitution, the portal would be the local county attorney's office or the Council on Crime and Justice, but the council may end up referring the person to the local county attorney's office.
Correct.
So,
or to reparations directly, just depending on the situation.
Okay.
right.
For you as service providers, the distinction is important, but for your clients, obviously, they just want to be made whole. They don't care what we call it. They can call it anything they want. They just want to know what can they receive for what has happened to them. And so it's really important then to figure out, okay, I know the county attorney's office does this, but I'm not going to call it that. I'm just going to say, call them if you have a current case.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Is this a pool of money that you have, or are these programs tied to the perpetrator's ability to pay?
Go ahead.
In terms of the third category that Lolita mentioned, emergency assistance, those are funds that are made available to nonprofit agencies and have the criteria that we've been talking about, where it's not available from another source. It's related directly to the crime, and it addresses safety and immediate issues. And that same process that Lolita talked about, assessment process, that would be what we would go through as well when crime victims contact us and are in need of some kind of supports in that way. We have access to those funds as well.
Is it a good time, Ellie, to sort of go over through the financial piece of it, or do you want me to wait?
Why don't you wait, and let's
Okay.
get Sharon to keep plowing ahead.
Because
Some of
that
this will-
question, just let's keep that, because we did a piece on that yesterday.
No, we'll just keep plowing ahead here.
All right, so what we do, a big part of what our crime victim advocates do over the phone on our 24-hour hotline is really give crime victims the opportunity to talk about what happened to them and process it. Sometimes in a hotline call, that might be the only thing that they do. But it just depends on what is identified as most needed and what the circumstances are. Every call is different. The crime victim advocate will also, if it is an immediate situation that's needing to be addressed, will work and strategize with that person about what possible solutions there might be, and provide information about what options they might have, depending on the circumstances. We provide information about financial supports, and that's the three categories that we've just talked about. Sometimes we'll assist someone with filling out a reparations application, but we won't go further into that now. We've already talked a little bit about this, address immediate needs of safety and loss. And as we've already indicated, we can't replace cash loss, but we address immediate issues around broken windows or needs for lock changes or broken windshield or those kinds of things. We, on a limited basis, accompany folks to harassment or restraining order appointments. If it's an order for protection, we'll make the referral if they're not already in contact with domestic violence services. We refer crime victims, as you do, to a number of pertinent resources if they're looking for civil or criminal legal assistance, or crisis supports, counseling supports, a range of things. We make a number of referrals. Occasionally we have called to advocate with landlords if it's something where a case of homicide victim and that person was the primary income for the family, there might be a situation where they need to need some assistance or have some delay in their payment of their utility, or advocating with some of the folks that they're currently working with. We also assist crime victims in explaining kind of what they might anticipate, what might happen next, depending on what process they're involved in. And then we, certainly it's the hundreds of community agencies and services like yourselves that we connect with that helps us to do our work, and that we couldn't do without making connections to the community and letting you know about what we have available. These are the primary ways that that folks find out about us. The victim notification card that's provided when someone makes a police report in most jurisdictions. Our number is on that card for, again, certainly for the metropolitan jurisdictions and for others across the state. We, through community outreach and meeting with community centers, community agencies, service providers, like I say, yourselves, Minneapolis 311, our website, crimeandjustice.org, and then by folks who have used our services and let other folks know. The crime victim advocates operate from something called a NOVA model, which is the National Organization for Victims Assistance. It's a method that places an emphasis on active listening. We certainly prepare our crime victim advocates to interact with crime victims in a respectful and non-judgmental manner, as probably all of our is all of our goal in connecting with the community. And advocating for the needs identified by the crime victim. So we're not there to tell them what they need to do, but really to help them to identify options and to strategize about what kind of supports they might have available, and supporting their decision making. Crime victims often feel a sense of loss of control, and we don't want to contribute further to that by taking charge of the situation, but really to provide them with their options and talk through those. We do advocacy in probably these three areas: criminal justice advocacy, in helping them and letting them know about those services, making referrals to the city or county attorney's office. Personal advocacy, as I mentioned, with landlords, with utilities, and legal advocacy in the civil arena. And so this is just an example of some of the kinds of supports that we provide for these different types of crimes. Assault, certainly addressing issues of safety immediately. I've already mentioned this: lock changes, window door repairs, resource referral, letting them know about the steps around protecting their identity if they and what steps they might not yet have taken. And so just have some examples of a crime victim call. It's a call about assault, and as I mentioned, though our primary focus isn't intimate partner violence, but we do get a good portion of our calls are related in some way to that. Maybe not that is the immediately identified issue, but through the conversation, it becomes apparent that that's the situation. We work to address safety issues initially. Talk with them about process for order for protection or harassment order if that's what pertains. Make referrals to domestic violence services and provide other information. Sometimes we do advocate with landlords. Maybe it's not a criminal charge, but there's some immediate support that we can provide, landlord utilities or other supports. With vandalism, damage to property, identifying safety concerns related to the damage to property, address car safety and repairs related to safety, and we make payments directly to vendors and not to the crime victim themselves or to or reimbursement. It's making payment directly to the vendor.
Sharon, you've got about 7 minutes left.
All right. Okay. Assist with, now this is probably something that most often is through the county attorney's office, but occasionally this has come up. We might connect them if there was, as I mentioned, a situation where the primary income for the family was the person who was killed. We might connect them with resources for clothing, for other losses that they have immediate needs for that they don't have another source for. In the case of auto theft, I've already mentioned this. If there's auto theft, we would need the report number verification. We might advocate with the impound lot. Sometimes it's a situation where it's not economically a feasible situation for them to retrieve their car in terms of its value or the damage that it's incurred. Advocating with the impound lot to help them get their belongings from the car, which is sometimes a process that involves some steps.
And just specifically about the impound fees, for instance, different organizations in the prosecutor's office has this. Sometimes we get grants, and sometimes they're specific to a very specific type of crime. So about 2 years ago, we had a specific grant that was given to us by the feds just on impound fees for victims. So we were able to give more money and very specific money, and then the money was done. And so now we don't have that grant. But you might hear sometimes where different offices have the ability to do something. It's sometimes based on grants. And then the other thing I would say is that a victim had their car impounded. They were victims of a drive-by shooting. And so we were working, we got the car out of evidence because it was impounded for evidence, but it still had some bullet holes on the car. So we could help them with the impound. The car was still running, but we weren't going to pay to get the bullet holes fixed because the car could still run.
Right.
So, you know, is that a great outcome? Probably not for that person, but the immediacy is really what's important.
And then, so the other question I have for you, Lolita, is when that specialized money comes in, you know, and you have that as a resource, do you advertise that in any way so that 211 would be able to pick up on that through, you know, your resource folks? Or is that just something you guys keep close to the vest?
Because we get so many calls about it, we don't have to advertise it. And most of the time we're getting calls saying we don't have that money, but when we do have that money, it's pretty much gone.
Okay.
So it's not that. But I do see now with this collaboration, a process where we may have on occasion or have our receptionist when we get the grant, you know, have a point person and make sure that we let them know, okay, for the next 3 years we have criteria, but just to let you know, the prosecutor's office does have some impound fees or whatever the
well, and that would
available.
make sense to coordinate with, like, Jackie, who is our legal liaison through Call for Justice.
Actually, the resource staff assigned to your organization.
And so could we, after this, make that kind of connection so
That's Mary.
Okay.
She's not here.
And Mary was here yesterday.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And if Mary's not around, one of the other resource staff. But that's great information because we run into what you said exactly. As soon as we get it, it's gone. And then somebody hears it from somebody on the number 16 bus, and then, you know, the whole thing kind of tumbles out of proportion. But if we know that there is something specifically for this situation that's only going to run for this much, that really is helpful information for us.
And having somebody, point person in our office. Okay, the auto, for instance, we had a specific advocate that was working on just the request on auto impound fees. So that's something important for you to know.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. All right, Sharon. Oops. Yeah, Melissa.
So how long does this usually take? So let's say someone's car is in the impound lot, and you guys are able to help them. What is that? How long is that process until they've really received the financial help and are actually able to get their car out? Because I mean, I figured the longer that it's in the impound lot, the higher the fees get.
That's right. And in the case of our office, if they notify us immediately once they've been contacted by law enforcement that where their vehicle is, we encourage them to contact the impound lot, and actually, if they're able to go there and to see the condition of the vehicle and that it's drivable. Sometimes they will be informed about that by making a phone call, but then they've also had surprises once they've started up the car. And so if they're able to assess that, then we can meet them and retrieve the vehicle at that time. If it's not drivable, they need to make arrangements for a tow out of the lot if we're going to do that process. So it's usually a very quick process once those steps happen. And we work to address it as quickly as possible so that there isn't that additional charge by day.
And would you be able to help with that tow as well, or?
In some instances, that's something that we can arrange. In other instances, that's been something that the driver can arrange, or the lot themselves might remove it from the lot and put it on the street. But it varies. Every situation's different.
And the reality is that if you are a victim of a crime, you're probably going to incur some cost somewhere that's not going to get reimbursed to you.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
And I think the goal, though, with your callers who have been crime victims is remember not to overpromise. You know,
yes.
Here's a number for you to call. I don't know what they can do for you, but they'll have more information for you versus call them and they'll help you. Okay? Remember, we're back to the same thing about with referrals to legal aid. Call legal aid, let them, they'll be able to tell you what resources they have available versus call legal aid, they'll help you.
Yes.
Okay. We've been on the receiving end. We don't do that to other people, so.
But we experience those calls regardless of how many times you tell them that, because I think part of the survival technique that many victims have is to relay some information that maybe isn't completely accurate or a flat out lie because they want to receive the services. It's not to undermine the process. It's because that's their survival technique, and we totally get it. So a lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, I call for justice and so told me this. And we know that that's probably not accurate, and actually, does it really matter? Probably not. So we'll just go through our process and say, oh, well, I'm glad they called you, but here's our criteria.
Yeah.
So we don't take it personal.
No. Right.
Okay.
Purse, wallet, we've already talked about this, identifying the different issues that you might want to attend to in terms of your safety and identity theft. And same here as well, this is something that we've talked about, freezing your credit account. Discussing options around, this is a frequent type of call that we get around harassment. Oftentimes, sometimes it's been a neighbor, and just talking through the issues that have occurred, what they've done, documenting the situation and what has happened if they have made a report or need to make a report, talking through their options and safety planning. And there are some other crimes that we've talked about. So it's really the help that we provide is really shaped by what the crime victim identifies. Every call is unique in terms of what is needed. So it's hard to say this. If they call about this is what we do. But at least there are some examples. A lot of factors go into what we're able to provide. And so we don't offer guarantees, but we will certainly do what we can, so let people know about us.
So basic rule of thumb, if someone calls in and they're the victim of a crime, just say, call them. They might be able to do something to help in your situation. Because I wish I had known that.
Right. or to at least further explain how to navigate the system, which
Right.
is critical.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yes, so they'll have additional information for you and be able to answer some questions you have.
Or is your
Absolutely.
case charged?
Yes, absolutely.
And the value of a police report.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And the value,
For
absolutely.
your insurance,
Yeah.
if
And you
nothing
guys,
else.
I mean,
Anything.
yeah, for sure, talk about the value of a police report. That's something that easily can convey, do you have a police report? No. Do you know that may be very important for you for insurance purposes or for purposes of navigating the system? No, I didn't know that. Okay, well, you can call your police department, get the number. Okay, Sharon, are you about
All right.
ready here, kiddo?
There's
Yeah.
my contact information.
Bravo.
All set?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Lolita.
I would just say there's a couple comments before I start. One is when we're talking about police reports and maybe the value of it or not, one of the things that there's a lot of research around in terms of victimization is the control of the situation. And even though it looks like maybe nothing will happen if you make the police report, like really who cares, actually sometimes something does happen when you least expect it. There may be a run of thefts, car thefts, and you wouldn't even know that the police department now has decided, I know because I'm at those meetings with the police department, but you may not know that they're now focusing in a certain area for these kind of crimes, and they end up picking somebody up.
That actually happened when I made the police report. The police officer told me that they had a rash of car thefts where they just like bash the window, grab what they could, and run. And they had people that were casing the lots. So every time, that's how they create the paper trail.
Yep, and that's how they put kind of the sting operations to the police department. And then the second part of that is that there is a sense for a victim to go and meet with an authority to tell them what has happened to them. And there's some ownership of that and accountability. And so there is a sense of, okay, somebody in the community is going to listen, somebody in authority is going to listen to what I said, beside my girlfriends or my friends who, commiserate with me but really can't do too much. So there's kind of two pieces of that on the victimization of making the police report. The other thing I would say is that there were a lot of questions yesterday about identity theft, that you receive a lot of phone calls about identity theft. And identity theft is a crime. But it's one of those crimes. It's not the broken arm. It's the nuances, the ongoing sort of just permeates, just making life difficult. So one of the things that's important is on the identity theft is documentation, if somebody calls about that. And then reporting it to the police, and then the prosecutor's office would review it for possible charging. But identity theft is a big one, and it's not, the outcome is not perfect, because it seems like once you get one of the tentacles of the octopus, there's 3 more tentacles that you haven't thought about or knew about. And then
Sounds like you're describing my life. Go on.
And then harassment orders. Harassment is really a very unique, very intense area of the law, because pretty much anything, a lot of things can be harassment. It's unwanted, unsolicited, repeated acts. That could be pretty much anything by anybody that you don't get along with, right? So the purpose of addressing a harassment issue isn't to get them in the system. Because once you go into the system, the expectations of a victim are really high. So for instance, you have a neighbor that keeps bugging you, stepping on your lawn, and we get these, stepping on your lawn, or the basketball goes into their driveway, and it happens 3 times in a week. Well, that's repeated unwanted acts of which you've already talked to that person, they keep doing it. Is a police officer really going to come to your home and arrest your neighbor's kid for that? No. Is anybody even going to prosecute that? Never. So the reality is that there's some practical pieces in any information that you give. And some of it may be, you may need to put a little fence between the two of you. Should you have to do that? No. Would that give you peace of mind? Maybe.
But let me dovetail back to another training that we've done. With that example, the neighbor who's, stepping on the lawn, being the pain. Remember our training on community mediation.
Right.
That's the kind of thing that have you thought about community mediation? Remember that the mediation service will actually reach out to the person that's bothering the person who's calling, so just I had to do that. Okay.
I had just a quick question about the identity theft. So when you report to the police, you report it to your local police, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Even though it could be like some person in Oregon who happened to get your credit card number and it's like.
You report it to your local police, and then they'll make a decision about who has jurisdiction. Okay. Crimes, victimization of crimes are really where it takes place, not where you live. That's where the jurisdiction comes. However, in something like that, it could be Ramsey County, Hennepin County, Dakota County. It's all sorts of different places, and then there has to be a decision about where the jurisdiction will sit.
So I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
So when you say collect documentation for that, what type of documentation is it that they should be collecting?
Well, I would say anything that you know about that's out there, any of your personal information that you have out there that might be vulnerable to that person that has your identity. So bank accounts, mortgage information, any of those things that you just need to keep together. How that person might have gotten your information, that is really helpful to the police department too. So it's really documenting pretty much everything that could possibly be problematic for you. And also, where one place is really a good spot to tell them is your credit bureaus, because sometimes they know before anybody else knows who's been using. So when practical information is checking your credit account, credit score, once every 2 years, that's pretty practical. Then Sometimes you don't even know. So things like that.
And that's something that's available to you free once a year. And if you're a crime victim, it's my understanding that it's free to you to check each of those credit reports. And that's where you would put a hold or a freeze on your credit account. It's a pretty big step to put a freeze on your credit account because it's something where you can't access it either. But it might be something that you would want to do depending on what the situation is and who has your information.
And sometimes a freeze costs money, even if you're a victim.
Right. Well,
when my purse got stolen, I panicked like you do, and I checked, and you can put a hold on it, which is like for a limited amount of time. But if you put a freeze on it, it's there until you say you don't want it there anymore, and it can cost money.
Right. So. Right.
All right. So Lolita, you have. Oh, okay.
I just had a question, Lolita, about the importance of filing a police report. And so, as you know, some people are hesitant to have contact with the police. And so if somebody on a call says to me, I'm fearful of actually going into the police station to make a police report because I'm fearful of how the police will respond to me.
And what would be the fear of the response? Undocumented?
That they won't take it seriously, or that they will say, I don't have enough information, or something related to that. And so in some schools of thought that may be like additional trauma. So I'm wondering what advice you would give me as to how to deal with that caller, what to say to that caller.
The most important thing is they still have to make the police report. You're going to get all different kinds of responses.
Okay.
Or not.
Okay.
And maybe it will be a really good surprise for them to go and have that experience with their police department. But we take all sorts of calls where people will call me directly and say, went down to the first precinct and I talked to the sergeant at the desk, which is the face of the police department, and I tried to make a police report and he wouldn't let me. Okay, well, who'd you talk to? When did you go? And then I make a call.
Okay.
I'll say, this is the experience that somebody had, and I don't call that person, I call the commander usually of the entire first precinct. And the only way that they're going to know that is if they get the response. Sometimes advocates, depending on the type of case like domestic violence, they may go with them to make the police report. And in terms, we talked a little bit yesterday about undocumented. No, first of all, we come from a state where there's no mandate to report undocumented people.
Oh, okay, that's what, okay.
So for the police department, pretty much, and for my office, prosecutor's office, and for advocates, nobody cares or asks if you're documented or undocumented. Okay. It may come up in the course of the prosecution of a case if the defendant brings it up or the defense attorney brings it up in terms of the participation of the victim and witness, because we have something called now a U visa, which allows a victim or witness of a crime to solicit and apply for some kind of a permanent status in now, that's a piece of it, if you are assisting with the investigation or prosecution of a case. So the defense usually will bring that up as, oh, that's the reason why they're doing this, and so then we have to talk about it a little bit at trial.
Okay.
And that would be, they'd raise it for credibility purposes.
Yes.
As it relates to the witness.
Yes. So in that case, I would say you need to make a police report.
Okay, got it. Okay.
That's kind of how everything starts.
Okay.
And some police departments, I know Minneapolis at least for sure, you can do it online for something basic, like if your car,
Right.
like basic vandalism or something, you can make a police report right on their website.
And so the one thing, as Lolita gets started here, that I want to emphasize is that what Lolita's talking about with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office is actually probably, well, actually the best in the state and one of the best in the country as it relates to victims advocacy. And I raise that because, you know, the other, 76 counties that you handle on the weekends and, you know, on the holidays, the county attorney's offices that you may be referring people to are going to have different programs. I mean, every county attorney's program, every county attorney's office has to focus on victims' rights because that's part of the statute, as we've given you in the training paper. But bear in mind that you're hearing about what is a Rolls-Royce program today, which is great, okay? And we have a lot of people who are in Hennepin, but not every county attorney's office is going to approach victims advocacy, victims' rights like Hennepin. All right, so just so we're on that page.
And I think that's a really good point, because when we were talking about money, even that's very different depending on the prosecutor's office. I think one thing that you can promote with the people that you serve is that if you don't get a response from the initial person that person is calling from that agency, they need to either email, which might be better than a phone call, or call a supervisor. Once it's in writing, you would be very surprised at how many things happen for that person and what kind of response that they have, because everybody has to be accountable to their bosses and sometimes, many times, to funding resources, and it makes it very different when it's in black and white. And so promoting that and instilling some kind of power and control for the victims that you're talking to it's very good. I mean, I get them all the time, so I know, because I have to respond to them.
And would that also be appropriate to talk about the Ombudsman's office? Yep. Okay.
And so then the other thing that we have, and I'll just talk about this separately, and I'll talk about everything else in a little bit. There our state, every state actually has an Office of Justice Programs, and that's the state organization that deals with all sorts of victims' rights on a whole bunch of different levels. Some of it's research and writing, some of it is grants, some of it's direct services, some of it is complaints, and the complaint part of it is if you have a victim, a crime victim who says, you know, I was a victim of this crime, the prosecutor was horrible anywhere in the state, and I don't feel that I got my victim's rights were violated. Okay, so what would you do with that call? Well, you would make them call, or you would tell them that they could call the Office of Justice Programs. And there is actually a group of people, 3 of them, they're called ombudspersons for victims, and I'm going to send Ellie all of this information, and they're wonderful. And they will investigate the complaint of the victim about whether their victim's rights were violated either by the prosecutor's office or the investigative unit. So if it's the sheriff's office or their local police department. And this is all, they have their power, they have subpoena power, which is a pretty big deal for a non-criminal justice program, through legislation. So they can inquire and actually ask for our records on the case, which nobody else can. And then we talk about what has happened in the case. And, you know, I have gotten some inquiries from, and I know the investigators very well. But I have to respond and have to say we did X, Y, and Z, or we didn't, or that was actually law enforcement, and then there's a response to the victim. It takes a while sometimes, or not, depends on the kind of information, but that's a real viable, it's a very energetic group of investigators. They do not do nothing. So if you have a crime victim, now if it's about a judge, the only recourse in that is to file a complaint with the Board of Judicial Standards. That's where they would investigate it. There isn't like an outside organization that looks at a judge and what the judge does, because every crime victim and every defendant pretty much doesn't like what the judge does, no matter what the outcome is. They're never satisfied because it's never completely what they want. So they're always going to have complaints about the judge.
All right, so you have about 20 minutes.
Okay, so we'll start I have to stand a little bit, sorry. So the first thing you should know, the great thing you should know, is that Minnesota is just nationally and internationally really recognized as the most aggressive, assertive, proactive state in domestic violence, sexual assault, victims' rights, child abuse, and pretty much anything else. We have a real rehabilitative state, so we do a lot of treatment, a lot of restorative justice, very much on the cutting edge of everything. It doesn't feel like that as service providers sometimes, but absolutely. You go to another state and they don't have half of what we have. The other thing that's unique is that our office, our prosecutor's office, is probably the only prosecutor's office in the entire country that has a victim services division which sits as a separate division, not under a criminal head. And the importance of that is when I go to meetings on management levels, I'm at the same place as the head of different criminal divisions, so that victims' issues are right up there with everybody else. And nobody gets, I mean, I get to say my piece and have Mike Freeman understand what issues of victimization we have. So there isn't another prosecutor's office that has that. The other thing about my office, it's made up of 2 different areas. Can I pull this, Ollie? Will it go with me? Will it go with me?
I think it will.
Okay. All right. So
here you go.
Yeah?
You got enough room? There you go.
I think so.
Okay.
So we have, and this is not true of every prosecutor's office. This is true of my office.
You might want to stay more in the middle rather than roam on the whole thing.
I'm a roamer, though.
I know you are.
Okay.
That's why I said that.
The Hennepin County Attorney's Office handles felony cases. That's anything that's 1 year and a day in jail. That the violation or the crime is 1 day or 1 year and a day. That's for adults. If it's a misdemeanor, those are all the lower level cases. Some of them are like the nuisance cases, things like that. You know, the stolen wallet, traffic, any of those. That is handled by the city in which it occurred. So Minneapolis, Brooklyn Park, everybody has a city attorney's office. Sometimes what you'll see is some cities, if they're really small in the rural areas especially, they'll team up with 2 or 3 different cities and have 1 prosecutor for that. But for instance, Bloomington, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, Eden Prairie, Edina, Minneapolis, all the bigger, they all have their own city attorneys. So that's misdemeanors, and those are the city attorneys. If it is a juvenile, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office handles both the felony and the misdemeanor. That is not true of all prosecutors' office. It is true of Hennepin County. Any crime that's committed by a juvenile, we handle. We have our own division to do that. So that's important within the county attorney's office. We also have victim witness. And so yesterday somebody asked me, is an advocate a lawyer? Well, an advocate can be a lawyer. Like if you're in Eastern Europe, they call their lawyers advocates. So when they came here to look at the center, they were confused because I kept saying advocate. And they said, oh, you have a lot of lawyers. And I said, no, they're all advocates. So we have a victim witness unit, and then we have the domestic abuse service center. And I head up both of them. And so what victim witness does is these are advocates that are assigned to a case. Once a crime is reported, investigated, and then reviewed by a prosecutor, it's either called filed or charged. And once it's charged, that victim, every single victim in Hennepin County that falls under here gets an advocate. And that advocate, the prosecutor's office, is the office that's responsible for enforcing victims' rights, the legislative rights that we have. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But we also have best practices, which include a lot of other things, more things than just what's in victims' rights. We go out to the homes on a child abuse case, or a domestic violence case, or a sexual assault case. So we have a prosecutor and a victim witness advocate that will go out and meet the victim. That's not part of victims' rights, but that's best practices for our office. So the victims' rights is one thing, that's the legislation, but every office has their own best practices. So every victim, so if a victim calls you and says, I was a rape victim and I need some services, your response can be, well, if it's in Hennepin County, I know you probably had an advocate. Probably one of the 5 people that have called you is that advocate from the county attorney's office, and you should call them because that's your contact on the case. And this advocate can do, they do all sorts of things. Besides making sure that there are enforcement of victims' rights, they talk to them about housing, immediate needs, safety concerns, the broken window, kid issues, the counseling, who in their community that they can reach out to for that specific issue, police reports, whether they did or didn't make a police report, and why they didn't do that. And then everything is coordinated with the prosecutor on that in that case. So that's victim witness. So this is sort of case driven. However, yesterday we talked that if you called this number, this is our victim witness number, and it wasn't a charged case, and that victim wasn't from Hennepin County, we would get you an advocate to talk with that victim. It wouldn't matter to us. I mean, we may say, okay, it didn't happen in our jurisdiction, but here's Ramsey County's number, we know the person, or make the call over there. So we would talk to anybody, or they just want to talk about what happened. We don't care. But in terms of assigning somebody formally, it wouldn't happen unless the case was charged in our office. And then the other thing that they will do is they will get the information to the right person, whoever that is within our office. So for instance, my example of them trying to make a police report and the police officer didn't want to take it, say, at the first precinct, I'll just use that as an example. And they'll say, okay, well, try calling over there and tell me call my office and that we know about it. If it didn't get anywhere with them, they'd probably call me and say, can you call the commander over there because we had a problem. So it's kind of that trickling all through them. Then the other part that I happen to manage is the Domestic Abuse Service Center. And the Domestic Abuse Service Center was created, it was the first one in the country, not San Diego, as they say. And it was really like one stop for victims of domestic violence. But now it's become really a one stop for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, any kind of family violence. And if you speak Spanish, they know we have a lot of people that speak Spanish there. They come in for pretty much anything. And that's fine because we will service them. We will figure out what they need. So if they come in and say, you know, my bicycle was stolen, we're not going to say, you're not going to talk to anybody. We'll just talk to they'll talk to somebody. But it's really focused on that, you know, the orders for protection that you hear about and any of the kind of criminal case that might be going on, although people come in just to talk to an advocate. So the center, even though it's under the umbrella of the prosecutor's office, is really advocate-based. That is the most important thing in our office. And we have 7 contracts with 7 different community agencies that are not criminal justice agencies. They're nonprofit in the community, and we have them in the center providing services the way they want to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And would that include Tubman? Do you have a contract with them? We don't have one from Tubman.
Okay.
That would be We did when the center first opened, DAP and Tubman. But Tubman has so much presence downtown anyway, we coordinate a lot with their advocates.
Does that include stalking even if the person who's doing the stalking isn't someone that they actually know?
Yes, and no. Yes, because we have police officers there and prosecutors, so we have a team of police officers and prosecutors and probation and child protection. I mean, we have a lot of different agencies co-located at the center. And so if somebody came in and said, this person is stalking me and, you know, I don't know them, we would make sure that they got their information, because there's kind of a specific stalking unit in the Minneapolis Police Department especially. We would make the call. I would never have the victim leave, bless you, victim leave and say, okay, you need to go to this other place. Probably we'd have the prosecutor talk to the victim of stalking, figure out what's going on, and then I'd have that prosecutor talk to the prosecutor in the other city if it's not our jurisdiction and say, hey, this is going on. Or if it's a felony, then we'd figure out who's going to take the police report, what investigator. I mean, it's a very sort of, I give them to the prosecutor and then they figure out what they need to do for the victim.
So
does that make sense?
Right, so if a victim of stalking comes into that office, they will get the services that they need, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it really was supposed to be focused all about domestic violence, but that's actually, it's just expanded, like I'm sure all of your work has expanded too for more information. Yes.
Would you guys help them fill out the HRO though?
Okay, the HRO is filled out. No is the short answer. If it was a relationship, even for a short time, like a dating relationship, or if the relationship, for instance, we've had women come in who were divorced 20 years ago and then it starts again, the harassment, they would be with us. So they would be at the Domestic Abuse Service Center. But if it's the neighbor, that goes up to the self-help center. So we would walk them up to the self-help center so that they could have somebody help. There's somebody there that helps them with the harassment order.
No, I actually have a quick question. It's going to be a little off. But anyways, I had a call and she wanted to do a harassment order. There wasn't a relationship, but it was someone that they had met online. Mm-hmm. So is that an OFP?
That's
or would
an
that
OFP,
be HRO?
probably. It's probably an OFP.
Even though they've never had like any intimate relationship, nothing. It's just
Well,
all online.
It would depend on what that relationship was online. We'd have to kind of look at it. Okay. If the victim felt that that was a romantic relationship for the time and it wasn't just a stranger relationship, which probably if they met online, it's probably the romantic or the thought of a romantic as the basis, it's kind of a funky one, then we would probably take it.
Okay. So HROs send them to the self-help center?
Yep, HROs are to the self-help center, but if there's any kind of relationship, mother and son, you know, they like to file against, they might file against each other, grandchild and grandson. If you're related by blood, have lived together, there's, you know, pretty much what you would think of as a sort of a domestic violence case, those come to us. And even if they come to us and it's the wrong place, an advocate will walk them upstairs and say, no, it's really a harassment order. You also may have some victims that call you and they have a relationship, but they don't want the order for protection. They want just the harassment order. And so we're going to have a long conversation about how that plays itself out. Because the best protection, if you've been in a relationship, is probably the order for protection because of the response of the police and the response of prosecutors on these cases. And in a harassment order, not so much.
Well, I had a caller who had a man stalking her that he thought it was a romantic relationship and she had not, like she hadn't given him any encouragement with this, but the relationship was all in his head, and she felt afraid for her life. So would that be something that would come to you even though
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And we have a lot of those. And I can speak about this publicly because it's been in the paper, and I will say only what's in public, but there's recently been in the paper the DJ, pretty well-known DJ. It's just it was you know, a fan, according to him, that she has no connection with him whatsoever. And actually, what was in the paper was accurate. They weren't, the acts that he had were things that if she wanted to be with him would be nice, like flowers and, you know, that kind of contact. It wasn't like the threat to hurt or assault or anything. Yes.
Okay.
But somebody didn't know the word no.
Didn't know the word no and went way beyond just not knowing the word no. Now, what we will have in the conversation with that person that you've described, if they come in and say, okay, so how is it? Oh, well, they're a friend of a friend of a friend, but I've never met him. He saw me on Facebook. That's a big conversation we have. Get off social media immediately. Mm-hmm. The social media access for victimization is so huge. I mean, it is the basis of so much of what is going on now. So we will have really frank conversations with that victim about, okay, you're off, you need to be off social media. We don't kind of mess around with that. Get off Facebook, get off all of those things. Change your phone number. Yep, it's going to be a pain in the neck, and you have, I know, 1 million contacts when you're all of 25 years old. But those million contacts, you're probably going to have to go out and reach out to people that you really trust. Otherwise, you're going to continuously get these phone calls. Now, it doesn't mean that what that person is doing isn't a crime, and we won't pursue that. But there's some practical things that victims need to do to get control of what's going on in their life. And that stalking, huge. I mean, that's one area where we really talk about it. In another area, and I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, was where we have the younger girls and their parents want to come in and file restraining, or they want to file everything, and they want to, you know, they want to go to the police and tell the police. Well, what we end up finding out when we talk with the victims separately from the parents is that actually she wants to be with this boy who the parents don't like, and she's given him access to her information, just she hasn't disclosed everything to her parents. So what we talk to them about is schools. If some of it is happening in schools, the schools are responsible for maintaining a safe environment for the student. They may say, go to the police, but they have the responsibility. And so many times you have to self-advocate with the school counselor, vice president, and say, okay, this is what's going on. What is your plan for my daughter or my son? And you know, they don't jump all over that necessarily all the time. So you have to, that's the first place. And then maybe you bring in the criminal justice system, because the problem is with harassment orders, if the person looks at that person and there's a restraining order saying they can't do that, like they can't do any unwanted repeated acts, and that would fall in that, are they going to make a police report? Is a police officer going to take that report? And then is a prosecutor going to prosecute that? No. So the expectation is really high, and what the practical part is that it's just not going to happen.
Lolita, you've got about 4 minutes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So I've actually had 2 calls recently where it's the opposite. Like the person that's calling has had protection orders filed against them, and then the person that filed against them comes to them. Mm-hmm. And then they're confused because they're like, well, so now am I going to get arrested? But they're the ones that came to me. So could you just reframe?
The orders for protection are very explicit. They have explicit language. Okay. And when they're in the order for protection hearings, they are told explicitly by the judge, you will be in violation of this order even if you're invited to the home.
And even if not invited, I mean just, okay.
Right.
Perfect.
You
even
come anywhere near whether that victim is telling you, the petitioner is telling you, I need my screen windows put in, or I want you to spend time with the kids. If there's an order for protection and then that victim decides they don't want that person there, they can call the police even if they were invited to.
Okay.
Although, Natanya, to answer your question, we don't want to be giving people legal advice. So you
Right.
have somebody calling you who says, hey, you know, I've got this OFP against me, and he or she is inviting me
Yes.
out or something like that. Please don't be giving them legal advice.
Okay, so what was the answer?
The answer is you can go to the lawhelpmn.org website, look under orders for protection, where they'll have a position sheet, a legal fact sheet that'll tell them what their rights are. Or you can say you need to go back and look at what the order says, and you need, you know,
Or
you
you
need
can
to follow what the order says.
Or you can call
perfect.
us.
Okay,
That's the desk number, because we will talk to that person and say,
okay.
there's always some more information too, you know.
Got it.
What
Okay,
if the
thank you so
victim
much for
comes
that.
over knocking on their door? Like you have the person who the
Right.
or the OFP is against, and the victim decides they want to hang out and comes over and knocks on their door. What
You
do they
cannot-
do?
They can call the police.
Yep, but the police can't arrest the victim. The order for protection is not against the victim. The order for protection is against the perpetrator.
I guess what I'm asking is, will the perpetrator get in trouble if the victim is on their front stoop knocking on their door?
No, because
Okay.
they would, normally you would call, first of all, you don't open the door. That would be the first thing, so there's no access. Or you don't answer the phone call, so there's no access. There are things that you can do that no.
Okay.
And if that person was creating a nuisance like anything else, whether there's an order for protection or not, you call the police.
Okay.
Because the paper is a piece of it, but it's not all of it. What I do want to get to is the financial part, which is, I know, what we've been talking about a little bit. So along with all these kind of things that are special to a prosecutor's office, we talked a little bit about the Emergency Assistance Fund. The Emergency Assistance Fund is distributed through the state, and it's given to all nonprofits and most prosecutors' offices. And so they're little bunches of money, and they run July 1st through June 30th of every year. Some years we get no funding, like when it was really bad, probably in, when was it, 2008, I think for 2 years we got no funding. But it usually runs anywhere between $5,000 and $15,000 for an agency. And the threshold for that, it must be an emergency. So I'll give you two examples. One, somebody needs to flee. Haven't made a police report, victim of domestic violence, wants 3 bus tickets for her and her kids, and wants to go to North Dakota and needs to flee because she's been assaulted in the past. We will look at that. And emergency, we may allow that. We may certify that and have them leave. Broken window. They need it fixed. That's kind of a no-brainer. Usually a police report's made, we'll do that. But, we'll also make the phone call to the landlord. What else are you doing for this victim to keep her safe? Knowing what we know. It's not just that. An advocate will be involved with all of it. So that's really an emergency fund. But what you will see and what you should know is that, say I have $5,000 left, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office has $5,000 left in their emergency fund, but somebody in Isanti County calls Isanti and they have no money left. That victim, no matter where they are, can call any other agency and ask for emergency money, and it's all on the Office of Justice Program website, who has the money and who doesn't. So I still will have to make the assessment on that victim, and it's usually through an advocate or prosecutor's office that's calling me, and say we can give the money. So the money, although it's to our office, it's not specific to Hennepin County. It's anybody in the state.
And what website was that again?
Office of Justice Programs.
Okay.
You go to there and you go to emergency assistance, and it's right there, and they list every single county and how much money they have. Separate from that, so that's one piece, it's over here, we use it. Separate from that, we have, our prosecutor's office has money through defendants paying fees, and it's called a victim fund. And we use that for cases that are in our office and whatever the victims may need through that. So we may need to literally move a victim for a 3-month period during the pendency of a case. We don't do witness protection like they say on TV. It doesn't exist in Minnesota or pretty much anywhere. What we do is safety planning for the safety of that victim or that witness, and for the integrity of the case. So if we need a witness and we know that they're in trouble and that they are in danger, we may be able to assess what we can do for that witness or that victim in order for them to continue to participate in the case, but also to be safe. So we have that too. And not all prosecutors' office has that. Ramsey does not. They do not have any fund at all. If they don't get it out of their emergency money, they do not have any money for victims outside of the emergency money. And then we have a separate pool of money that is related to the prosecution of the case, which means a witness is in Florida. We need to fly them back up for the case. We will pay for their flight to come back up and stay overnight for the prosecution of that case. So any questions about the money part of it? The short answer for you is this number, if there's a case that's coming in.
612-348-4003. And Lolita, on that note, we've got a break.
Okay, good.
Everyone, before we go, obviously, again, many questions. This is wonderful. I want to make sure that everybody has seen at the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7 that we do list some other resources, including the Sexual Violence Center, which has a crisis line, and that is dealing with instances of sexual violence which are different than domestic violence. That Outfront Minnesota also can provide some crime victims resources for LGBTQ people, and that Breaking Free exists as it relates to persons, usually women, who have been involved in human trafficking and who want to break out of it. So there are those resources. Remember, we have lawhelpmn.org as a standard fallback referral. Minnesota Legal Advice Online, while very important generally for you as a fallback or sometimes primary referral, will not help with this. It's not a place to send people, nor are the court self-help centers a place to send folks as it relates to victims' rights, crime victims' rights. So I think what we've heard today, to encapsulate, is that the Council on Crime and Justice has their hotline, which is 24/7, 365, which is a wonderful resource because the county attorney's office is only during regular business hours.
Yeah, 8 to 5.
So that is a wonderful place to be sending people. The other thing that we've heard today is we have 2 portals here, 2 good places to send crime victims to. And so we have a better understanding of that now. And if you have further questions, direct them to me. We'll get them to Lolita, and we'll connect Lolita with Mary on a go-forward basis. And everyone, thank you very much for those folks who have been viewing from their laptops or home computers. This is Ellie Krug signing off for Call for Justice. Remember that we are the only program of its kind in the United States that trains 211 on how to make good targeted legal referrals. We are an award-winning program through the American Bar Association. And certainly we would welcome donations to Call for Justice. You can find how to donate by going to our website at www.callforjustice.org, although you know that because that's how you got to this video. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be seeing you next time on another topic, Training 211.